Everyone made an offer. Market went wild for the rare love slave, but only one human took her home. The auction dome above Zephyra 6 was a cathedral of excess. Cry's talon spires blooming from orbital scaffolding, their tips lit in violet and gold, shimmering like the inside of a gemstone cut for a god's indulgence. Beneath its transparent arches the galaxy's most powerful gathered to indulge in a quieter kind of violence. Ownership. The air pulsed with soundless tension. 1,000 languages whispered across the chamber through neural implants and translator bots. Perfumed mist curled through vents like coiling silk. Cardamom crushed star ginger, hints of narcotic sugar lotus that made even cold-blooded delegates leaned forward with hungry eyes, but all of it blurred against the singular figure standing at the center of the platform. Syria, the last of the House Velian line, one of the final pure blood. Ziri love breeds a species so genetically sculpted for desire that their very presence could disrupt peace accords. She wasn't chained in iron, she didn't need to be. Her skin was a rich deep violet, iridescent like a gemstone breathing, and her hair long and white as frost, light spilled in soft waves over bare shoulders, braided in sections just teasing enough to suggest where fingers might go if given permission. Each step she took across the obsidian stage made her hip chains whisper, golden links kissing her thighs. She didn't look nervous, she never did. Her confidence wasn't an act, she was built to be adored, and she enjoyed it. A hand drifted up her neck, lingering at her collarbone. She smiled, not seductively but slowly, like a secret shared, and the crowd gasped, bid screamed into the air, numeric flares firing across holeless screens and private networks. The auctioneer's voice thundered with synthetic glee. Bidding begins at 300 million GTC. They were already above it, but Syria didn't glance toward the bidders, not toward the Centator syndicate pair already arguing over whose funds were more liquid, not toward the Signori priest whose trembling voice had offered a moon as dowry. No, her gaze shifted back past the tiers of golden thrones and hollow banners, past the security guards scanning for biometric threats to him. The human. He stood alone back near a column, half swallowed in shadow, not even seated. His posture was wrong for this room, shoulders slightly hunched, hands clasped behind his back like a visitor in a museum he hadn't meant to enter, and he hadn't placed a single bid. Jasper Wren had been on Zephyra 6 for less than 48 hours. He was a terraform architect by trade, sent to assess orbital drift patterns and geocore behavior in one of the moon's agricultural rings. The auction invite had come as an unexpected courtesy from a local official he'd accepted out of curiosity, and now he couldn't move. He wasn't sure what had struck him first, her impossible beauty, or the way she carried it, like it wasn't for them, like it was hers. And then their eyes locked. Something passed between them, instant electric, not seduction, not yet. It was recognition, as if she saw through him, or worse, into him. And for the first time that night Syria hesitated. It was brief, half a heartbeat. But something in her shoulder shifted, a flicker of doubt quickly masked by the smile she wore like a crown, but it had been there. She took one final step forward and raised her hand. The room froze, her voice carried without enhancement, as though the silence bent to listen. As is my right under galactic trade law, Article 9, Clause 23, a collective inhale. I refuse all offers. 1,000 sounds crashed into each other, gasps, outbursts, digital wails of interrupted bids. The auctioneer sputtered in 3 languages before their vocal modulator sparked in protest. That is not an override, you must submit legal cause. But she wasn't listening. Syria stepped down from the stage, golden chains murmuring against the floor. She walked with slow, graceful certainty through aisles of stunned power, her expression unreadable. Jasper's pulse hammered behind his ears. He thought about stepping back, about leaving, run. But he didn't. He stayed exactly where he was, because she was coming for him. When she reached him, she didn't speak at first, just stood close, too close, and tilted her head, studying him as though trying to place the exact word for what she saw. I was watching you, she said, her voice low and velvet warm, and you didn't look at me like the others did. I wasn't planning to look at anyone, he replied, his throat dry. I didn't even know this was a market. Her mouth curved. It is. And yet her fingers brushed his wrist, bare skin too. Bare skin. Heat bloomed where she touched him. He didn't flinch, neither did she. You stood still, she whispered, while they all reached. You didn't try to own me, and that's why I chose you. He wanted to ask why him, truly why she would throw away billions in wealth and protection for a man with calloused hands and modest shoes, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead he managed to quiet. What do you want from me? Sarah's golden eyes narrowed, not cruelly but with something sharper, hungrier. I haven't decided yet. A sharp trill rang out overhead. Security Warning protocol violation. A crimson light pulsed once near the ceiling. Followed by a mechanical hiss. Jasper turned his head toward it instinctively, but Sarah didn't. Her hand slid into his. Walk, she said, voice gentle but unyielding. While the system figures out what to do with us. You're serious? I'm never more serious than when I'm breaking the rules. Behind them, murmurs turned to shouting. A pair of enforcers moved toward the stage with scanners raised. Jasper looked back once at the dome, the crowd, the impossible cost of her decision. Then he looked at her. Her violet skin shimmered in the low light. Her long white hair swayed around her like a banner, and he followed. They disappeared into the corridor, the heavy doors whispering shut behind them. In the distance, another warning light turned amber, and someone who hadn't spoken all evening stood and silently followed the corridor, swallowed them in silence as the doors hissed shut behind them. The auction hall was now a memory, one seal behind layers of obsidian and gold, behind gasping nobles and flickering bid holos, behind laws violated and a future rewritten. Jasper walked beside her, unsure of where his feet were taking him. He felt the warmth of her hand in his, light but certain, like silk tied at the wrist. She hadn't let go, and he hadn't asked her to. The hallway they moved through was quiet, polished, lit, and low amber strips that pulsed faintly with movement. The lighting made everything feel slower, deeper, as if time itself had hesitated along with him. He should have hesitated, but he didn't. The woman beside him, no, not a woman, not in the human sense, wasn't trembling. Her gait was confident, controlled. Her hips moved in that same rhythm he'd seen on the stage, as if dancing was her default way of existing. Her long white hair flowed like falling starlight, catching the soft gold reflections of the lights above. She didn't seem afraid, but then she hadn't looked afraid when she turned down a billion credit bidding war either. Jasper tried to swallow. His throat was dry. I don't even know where we're going, he said finally, his voice a little Syria turned her head slightly, not breaking her stride away from the auction, from the expectation of what comes after. They stopped at a small lift tucked into the wall, a maintenance shaft by the look of it, unmarked, no public console. She placed her palm on a hidden reader, and the door opened with a whisper. Jasper hesitated at the threshold. She looked at him, one brow raised. Are you coming, or would you prefer to be escorted back into polite slavery? He gave a soft, nervous laugh and stepped inside. The door sealed shut behind them. They stood close in the small space, too close he could feel her warmth. She radiated it like she carried her own climate. He glanced down at their joint hands, still there. I don't understand what just happened, he admitted. She tilted her head toward him, her eyes aglow even in the dim interior. Yes, you do. You just don't believe it yet. I wasn't trying to buy anyone. I didn't even want to be at that auction. I was invited, she finished for him, by someone who thought it would impress you. Something like that. The lift hummed upward. The silence stretched between them, not awkward but thick, anticipatory. You're different, she said quietly. That's not flattery, it's a statement of fact. Jasper turned to face her. Because I didn't bid, because you didn't even lean forward. You said nothing, you watched me, she continued, but not like a predator. You weren't hungry, you were curious and confused, like you were trying to understand what I was instead of how I could serve you. A breath escaped him, slow and shaky. He looked down again. I've seen that look once before, she added. He raised his gaze. From whom? My reflection. The lift stopped. The door opened onto a dim corridor, quieter, less traffic, no vendors, no performers, just a soft hiss of distant filtration systems and the sterile tang of recycled air. Jasper stepped out with her, half expecting an alarm to blare or guards to descend, but the hallway remained still. How are we not being chased right now? He asked. We are, she said calmly, but not by guards, not yet. They're waiting to see if I broke a law or a precedent. She led him toward a suite at the far end, one of the small diplomatic lounges reserved for private negotiations. A palm skin later, they were inside. The door sealed behind them with a final sigh. The room was all soft curves and ambient lighting, velvet lounges arranged in a crescent beneath a transparent wall. Beyond, the glass Zaprix rotated slowly below, a pleasure moon wrapped in iridescent clouds and artificial auroras. Syria didn't sit, not yet. She stood near the window, her posture no longer performative but tall, composed, still. The chains at her hips glinted. The lights caught her bare shoulders. Her white hair shimmered like ice. I'm not what they say I am, she said without turning. Jasper stepped forward slowly, unsure if she was talking to him or to the planet. I'm not just trained to seduce, I was grown to do it. Design. She finally turned toward him. Her gaze didn't waver. There are neurochemical markers in my blood that trigger desire. My skin warms on command. My pupils dilate to match yours. I can smell tension like perfume and taste want like fruit. He swallowed, but none of that matters, she said, stepping closer. If I don't choose, you chose me, he said. Voice low, her hand rose not to touch him but to rest on her own heart. I did. A pause, and I don't know yet if that was brave or foolish. He nodded once. I don't know either. The faintest smile touched her lips. It wasn't seductive, it was honest. Then from somewhere deep in the walls a security light blinked once, then again a soft chime followed, subtle, almost polite but unmistakable. The system had noticed. They know, he said. They're deciding what to do about it. Do we run? If we run, we admit we're worth chasing. He hesitated, then asked the question that had been burning since the moment she touched him. Why me? Syria tilted her head slightly, her amber gold eyes seemed to glow brighter for a moment. Because you didn't ask for me, she said, and yet when I offered myself you didn't pull away. He took a breath. I still might. Good. She stepped into his space close enough to feel again. Her voice dropped. Because when you don't, it'll mean something. Their bodies didn't touch, not quite, but their breath mingled in the space between, and then a sound, faint metallic footsteps approaching the door. Syria's expression didn't change. She simply reached up, smoothed a hand down his chest and whispered, now kiss me. Jasper blinked. What? They're watching you. Want to make this look consensual, don't you? He opened his mouth, closed it, her fingers hooked lightly into his collar, not to pull him in forcefully but just to anchor the moment. Trust me, she said, and for some reason he still didn't understand, he did so. He leaned in. Their lips met, not with fire but with a kind of breathless uncertainty. It was soft, hesitant, honest. And when the door opened behind them, the two guards who stepped inside didn't raise their weapons. They just stared and left. When the door slid shut again, Syria smiled against his mouth. Well done, human, she whispered. You're learning. Jasper blinked at her. You're insane. I'm free. Then she pulled him down beside her onto the velvet lounge, still smiling. As Zephyra 6 turned slowly outside the window, golden and dangerous as the moment they were now trapped in, the guards were gone. The door clicked softly back into place, and for a heartbeat neither of them moved. Jasper sat motionless beside Syria, unsure whether what just happened was victory or the beginning of something much, much worse. The kiss still lingered on his lips, not just the sensation but the strange calm that had come with it. It had felt like falling forward into a moment he didn't understand but didn't want to escape. Beside him, Syria stretched with feline grace, her arms rising above her head, exposing the long bare line of her torso. She sighed, content, amused. They'll report we were occupied, she said, fingers threading through her hair as she reclined back against the lounge, and for now that keeps them from asking inconvenient questions. Until they find a reason to ask anyway, Jasper replied, trying to sound composed though his voice betrayed the buzz of adrenaline still humming beneath his skin. Syria tilted her head toward him, her golden eyes half-lit, almost sleepy, but Jasper had already started learning that she was never as relaxed as she seemed. They always ask eventually, she murmured, but I've learned that if you give them a story they're too embarrassed to interrupt. They'll hesitate long enough for you to write your own ending. You've done this before. The faintest smile played on her lips. Escaped or seduce my way out. A bad deal, both, but not like this. Jasper turned to face her. What's different now? You didn't ask for me, she said simply, which means you might still see me as real. He opened his mouth to speak but stopped. The way she said it, soft, matter-of-fact, without accusation, left no room for defense, just a quiet kind of truth. For a moment the room fell silent again, but this time it wasn't tense, it was something else. Something slower. Jasper leaned back against the cushions, exhaling. I came to Zephyra 6 to check geothermal data. My biggest plan for the week was eating alone and getting back to my station before the storms rolled in. Syria rolled on her side to look at him, head resting in her palm, and instead, you're on the run with a genetically engineered seductress with diplomatic immunity issues. He laughed once, sharp and surprised. Yeah, that about sums it up. Her smile widened. Do you regret it yet? He glanced at her, then out the window. The pleasure moon spun silently in the void beyond, iridescent, impossibly beautiful, and entirely artificial. No, he said quietly, but I'm starting to wonder what happens next. Syria's smile faded into something softer, more thoughtful. She reached down, unclipping the small golden chain that had hung from her hip. It slid free with a sound like falling coins. Do you know what this is? She asked, holding it between two fingers. Jasper shook his head. It's not for restraint, she said. It's not even ceremonial, it's psychological, a visual symbol for those who buy girls like me to remind them we're never fully unbound. Even when we're free to move, we're still wearing something. She let it fall to the floor with a quiet clink. Then why wear it? Jasper asked, his voice quieter now. Because if I throw it away before I'm truly free, she said, someone else will put it back on me. Jasper watched her. For a long moment there was no performance in her voice now, no seduction, just exhaustion cloaked in elegance. You're tired of being looked at, he said almost to himself. Syria looked at him, her eyes didn't sparkle this time. I don't mind being seen, I mind never being known. He sat up straighter. She looked down, brushing invisible lint from her thigh. There was a time I believed if I seduced enough people, one of them would eventually fall in love with me, not with what I was made to be, but with me, and turns out most people love their version of you, not the real thing. Jasper was quiet for a beat. Then with a calm, almost defiant gesture he reached into the satchel slung across his body and pulled out a small thermal canister, silver battered utilitarian. He handed it to her. She blinked. What is this? Dinner, he said, sort of emergency ration soup. Her face was unreadable. You carry soup around? I travel a lot and I forget to eat. She stared at him. What? He said. Nothing, she murmured slowly. Unscrewing the lid, steam rose, faint and savory, rich with something vaguely herbed and human. She sniffed once, her throat bobbed as she swallowed, then quietly, it smells like comfort. Yeah, it's not fancy, but it keeps you alive. She took a tentative sip, then another. Her eyes closed for a moment, her shoulders dropped. She exhaled softly and didn't say a word. The shift was subtle, but Jasper saw it. She wasn't performing. She was just eating. It hit him harder than it should have. When she opened her eyes, there was something new in them, not vulnerability exactly, but a loosening, a thread of trust, however fragile. You're the first person to feed me without asking for something in return, she said. I'd offer a second course, but I think I'm out of protein packs, he replied. She chuckled. It was light, unguarded. Outside, a flicker of motion caught Jasper's eye, barely a shadow against the curve of the hallway. He turned, narrowing his eyes. There a shimmer, someone watching, then gone. He didn't say anything, not yet. Instead he leaned a little closer to her. We need to leave soon. I know they're going to follow us. Let them, I mean really follow. She finished the last sip of the soup, then handed the container back. I don't need them to stop chasing me, she said, brushing a thumb across her lower lip. I just need someone to run with me long enough to matter. Jasper held her gaze. I can do that. A slow smile spread across her lips. Careful, human, I might start believing you. The door chimed softly. A pause, then silence. Jasper reached for her hand. She gave it to him without hesitation. This time they stood together, side by side, and this time when they stepped through the door they weren't running, they were choosing. The docking tunnel sealed with a soft hiss behind them, the noise of Zephyra 6 and all its glittering menace faded, replaced by the quieter, more mechanical thrum of the shuttle's cabin. The walls no longer whispered perfume and temptation. Here it was clean metal, dim lights, the subtle vibration of the inertial stabilizers preparing for breakaway. Jasper let out a long breath, slow and measured. They had made it out for now. Syria sat opposite him, her posture unusually still, not like before when she'd lounged across velvet cushions like a feline goddess amused by her own power. Now in the sterile light of a transport shuttle without a crowd to watch or a stage beneath her feet, she looked stripped down, not less beautiful, never that, but quieter, realer. Her fingers traced the edge of the safety harness folded beside her. She didn't buckle in, just touched the webbing absently, like someone remembering a bruise. You don't have to talk, Jasper said gently, but if you want to, I do. She interrupted softly. I think it's time. She shifted, crossing one leg over the other, and turned toward him. The chains were gone. She had left them behind, and the sweet coiled like a discarded past. I was born in a tank, she began, nurture fluid and glass walls. I don't know what the sky looked like until I was 12. By then they'd already trained my muscles to move like liquid, my voice to modulate for pleasure, my gaze to trigger responses in most species. I was genetically perfected, sculpted, programmed and presented. She said the last word without bitterness, but Jasper heard what lay beneath it. I was designed to be the best version of a fantasy no one could keep. Her eyes flicked to him, not seeking pity, only honesty. They called me Syria of House Felian, but that's a branding. My house was a bolab, my lineage spreadsheets. My first kiss was sold, my first breath outside a dome was choreographed. Everything they say I am sultry, dangerous, exquisite. It's true, but it was never mine. It was made for them. Jasper stayed silent, listening, not out of politeness but reverence. She smiled faintly, almost apologetically. I'm not ashamed, not exactly. There's beauty in it. I learned how to bring people joy, to feel connection through the smallest gestures. I can turn a sigh into seduction, a whisper into worship, but none of it meant anything when I was only ever a mirror for someone else's desire. And then you chose, he said. She nodded, because for once I wanted something to be mine, not bought, not a sign chosen. Jasper didn't respond right away. He let the silence settle, honoring the weight of her truth. Then slowly he leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I wasn't always a terraform architect, he said, his voice quieter now. I grew up on a fringe colony, Delner. 3. Not a glamorous place, dry soil, slow oxygen processors, bitter water that never boiled clean, but it was home. Syria's eyes flicked up, listening. My mother was a systems engineer, my father was a gardener. They taught me how to build things, how to shape something from nothing, how to listen to the land and wait. I used to believe that was all I needed. A beat, then his gaze darkened slightly. 5 years ago the regulators failed, not because of a storm, not sabotage, just neglect. No one noticed the overloads, and when the coolant lines gave out, the reactors overheated, the dome cracked, atmosphere went thin. Syria's expression shifted, something softening in her gaze. There were 24 people on that colony, Jasper said. I was one of 5 who made it out. I don't know how I survived, but I remember what the air felt like when it turned cold and stopped feeding my lungs. I remember my mother's voice going quiet mid-sentence. He looked down at his hands. I left after that, took assignments far from colonized systems, told myself I was helping, saving other planets from what happened to mine. But really I was just drifting, fixing things outside so I wouldn't have to fix anything inside. He met her eyes again. That's the version of me you found, not a rescuer, just a man who forgot how to belong anywhere. For a while they didn't speak. The shuttle's engines engaged with a low, steady rumble through the viewport. Zephyra 6 began to shrink, its swirling beauty dimming against the black. Syria reached across the narrow gap between them and placed her hand over his. It was a gentle, deliberate touch, no seduction, no performance, just warmth. You know, she said, they always told me that humans were primitive, unpolished, emotional in all the wrong ways. He raised a brow. And I think your imperfections are the only honest thing I've ever trusted. Jasper swallowed, the tightness rising in his throat. I didn't expect this, he admitted. Neither did I. Her fingers curled lightly around his. Their hands stayed clasped between them as the stars outside stretched, the shuttle leaping into a corridor of faster than light. Jasper looked at her again, at this alien woman, born in a lab, bred for pleasure but aching for personhood, at her long white hair trailing over her shoulder, her bare shoulders squared, not in pride but in strength. He didn't see a symbol, he didn't see a prize, he saw someone who for the first time wasn't being watched but seen. And Syria looked back at him, not as a client or a savior or an admirer, but as someone she had chosen to believe in. As the shuttle cut through the void, their grip tightened, not from fear but from something rarer, recognition. The shuttle glided into orbit over a quiet, unnamed moon, barely more than a speck of terraformed stone nestled in the velvet black. Jasper had chosen it precisely for that reason. It wasn't on any major charts, no registered settlements, no trade hubs, just one aging atmospheric relay station, a nearly abandoned research shelter, and a pale stretch of sky that didn't ask questions. It was the kind of place people went to be forgotten or to remember who they were before the galaxy started labeling them. They landed just after local dusk. The sky above the dome shimmered in soft indigo, pierced by a single low sun, its warmth barely strong enough to thaw the frost that lined the outer panels. But inside, the shelter system still worked, climate-controlled, powered by geothermal coils buried beneath the rock. It smelled of dust and dry metals, but it was safe. Jasper dropped his satchel onto the nearest console, kicked off his boots, and turned to find Syria standing by the doorway, lit by the moonlight filtering through the glass walls. She hadn't moved since they touched down. Her white hair fell around her like starlight, her arms crossed as if bracing against something colder than the wind. You okay? He asked, walking over. She nodded slowly. This place is quiet. You want noise? No, she said quickly, then smiled. I think I've just never been anywhere that wasn't designed to listen to me breathe. He glanced around the old dome. Well, this place is barely listening at all. You're safe here. Even the walls aren't paying attention. That earned a soft laugh. She stepped forward, slowly circling the room, trailing her fingertips along forgotten surfaces. Her body language was relaxed, but there was something deliberate in her movements, as if she was testing the space, checking whether it would reject her like so many others had. Jasper let her explore. He started unpacking just the basics: rations, a thermal kettle, 2 blankets. She turned toward him after a few minutes, studying him with a curious tilt of her head. You always this prepared, Earthborn? He glanced over. You say it like it's an insult. It's endearing. She stepped closer. You're always thinking 5 steps ahead and still somehow manage to look surprised every time I touch you. That's because you don't just touch, he said, reaching for the kettle. You arrive. She laughed again, but this time her smile softened. He set the kettle down on a small heating pad. You trying to court me with hot water? I'm trying to warm you up. Spark, she blinked. Spark, it suits you. She raised a brow. Because I'm volatile? No, he said, looking at her steadily. Because you're light in the dark. Because one moment with you changes everything after Her lips parted slightly, her breath caught just for a second. Do you give pet names to everyone you hide in shelters? With just the ones I don't want to lose. Something shifted in her then. The flirtation dropped, not because it faltered but because something deeper moved in to replace it. She stepped in, reached out and brushed a thumb along the line of his jaw. You keep doing that, she whispered, doing what? Saying things no one's ever said to me. And meaning them. I could call you other things, he said gently, if spark doesn't fit. Her eyes glimmered amused and touched. Try me. He stepped closer, lowering his voice, Starachi, because you move like light and silk at a daughter. She laughed. That's dangerous flattery, human or fireglass, because you're delicate and strong and anyone who mistakes you for fragile deserves to burn. She shivered. Not from cold and maybe, he added, just maybe, wild art, because I think even you haven't met all the parts of yourself yet. She stood very still for a long breathless second. She said nothing, then she leaned forward and kissed him. Not a performance, not for show, a real kiss, slow, open, sincere. Jasper didn't rush it. His hands rested at her waist, steady and warm. Her lips were soft and her breath tasted faintly of cinnamon and starlight. How he didn't know, only that everything else in the room and the galaxy disappeared when they pulled apart. She rested her forehead against his chest. You call me wild art, she murmured, and suddenly I want to curl up in her lap like I've lived there forever. Then do, he said without hesitation, and she did. She shifted into his lap with graceful certainty, thighs draped across his hips, knees nestled on either side. Her warmth settled against him like silk warm by sun. The blanket pulled around their shoulders as Jasper adjusted slightly, his hands coming to rest at her waist, steady, reverent. She sighed into his neck, not from exhaustion but from ease. Her white hair spilled forward like a waterfall of light, catching the glow of the heater's dull coil behind them. You feel solid, she murmured, like gravity. Remembered me? Jasper chuckled softly. You make it sound like I built you a planet. She pulled back just enough to look at him. Maybe you did, just with your hands instead of machines. Their eyes met. The space between them thinned, then vanished. She leaned in, slow, sure, and kissed him again, not coy, not teasing. Her lips were soft, parted just enough to ask, are you here with me? He answered by kissing her back deeper this time, his fingers tightening at her hips. Her body responded immediately. She rolled her hips slightly, just once, slow enough to make the breath catch in his throat. He felt her smile against his lips, still thinking 5 steps ahead. She whispered, only as far as your skin, he whispered back. Her hand slid beneath his shirt, fingers grazing over his abdomen, mapping the lines of him like a sculptor learning stone. He shivered beneath her touch, not from cold but from the tenderness in it, the deliberate gentleness, like she didn't want to break the moment by rushing. She pulled the shirt off him slowly, palms dragging over his chest. She watched him as she moved, not for approval, not for power, but for something rarer, connection. His breath hitched as she leaned in and pressed her mouth to the hollow beneath his collarbone. You're warm, she murmured. You're fire, he replied. Syria sat back just enough to loosen the clasp of the wrap around her shoulders. The fabric slipped down like water, revealing her violet skin glowing faintly under the low light, the gold undertones catching like molten metal. Her hair tumbled down her back, unbound and wild. Jasper's breath left him in a hush. God, you're, she smiled, one corner of her mouth lifting in amusement. Careful, human, you might run out of words. Not likely, he said, brushing her hair behind her ear. Not with you, not with my wild heart. That stopped her. She stilled, then slowly leaned in, forehead against his. Say it again, wild heart. Jasper lay beneath her breath, shallow hands spread wide across her thighs as she slowly guided herself down onto him again, with intention, this time with control. Syria didn't flinch or rush. She held his gaze, Violet's skin glowing in the amber light of the shelter's dome. Lips parted slightly as the sensation took her over, inch by inch. Jasper's fingers tightened on her as she took him fully, a low groan escaping his throat. Not from the pressure, not from the heat, but from the sheer beauty of her. She was everything. Her long white hair spilled around her shoulders, down her back, glowing like moonlit mist. Her spine arched with feline grace, slow and sure, as if savoring the stretch. The way he filled her when she began to move, rolling her hips in deep undulating waves, wasn't frenzied or mechanical. It was rhythmic, natural, like the motion had existed before language and she had only just remembered it. He didn't speak. He couldn't not with her, riding him like the world had shrunk to the space between their bodies. Every time she sank down again, the breath left his chest in a stuttering rhythm, his eyes never leaving hers. Sarah moaned softly, not the practice moan of seduction, but a real sound, ragged and honest. It surprised her, the intimacy of it, the way she couldn't contain the pleasure anymore. She gasped his name between clenched teeth, voice husky, primal, full of reverent disbelief. Jasper, He groaned again, his hands sliding up from her thighs to the flare of her hips, anchoring her without controlling her. Let her lead, letting her choose. That alone made her tremble. She leaned forward, bracing herself against his chest, and began to ride him. In tighter, deeper motions, every shift of her body drew another low, desperate sound from his throat, and the feeling of his heat buried inside her sent shivers up her spine. Look at me, she whispered. He did. Eyes locked, breath said body to body. I've never felt anything like this, she said, barely a breath. I know, he replied. Me neither. Her rhythm slowed, hips rocking in slow, steady circles that left them both straining for more. She was learning him, his body, his reactions, how his muscles tense beneath her touch. Every time he swore under his breath, she smiled. Every time his hands gripped her tighter, she moaned in response. It was a call in response of trust, tension, surrender. And then she sat upright, hair cascading down her back like a curtain of ice-lit silk, her breasts rising with each breath. The sight of her naked, wild, claiming her pleasure with no shame, made Jasper ache. She began to ride him harder, not fast but with fierce focus, deep, deliberate motions that hit every nerve inside her with molten precision. She gasped again, louder this time, and her voice cracked with how much she felt. She threw her head back, arching, jaw slack as a long moan escaped her. Jasper watched, completely undone. The woman above him